full marks, but you do understand that the engine, the gearbox, they're strong.
I think this engine part has been butchered.
Well, at least I've given you a challenge.
I couldn't resist it.
It's September 2019 and I'm in Cape Town about to rebuild a 20-year-old Land Cruiser I bought blind over the internet. I've secured the services of Paul Marsh, professional expedition vehicle builder, and Hubert Sneeman,
But Paul Jurgen doesn't.
Land Cruiser specialist extraordinaire.
It's got the new spigot bearing inside.
We've been through the testing and diagnosis and are about to begin disassembling major components in order to see what'll be needed to give this Land Cruiser 105 a new life.
Well, good morning. One full day has passed since I was last here, dropped the vehicle off, of course met Paul, chatted with Hubert, and if you haven't been watching the series, this is basically my build of my Africa Land Cruiser. It's a 20-year-old vehicle. There's 300,000 kilometers of work behind it, and we are rebuilding it and preparing an overland truck that I will be using for the channel for our exploration in Africa. Now, Sneeman's four-wheel drive are specialists at Land Cruisers. As you can see, there are Land Cruisers as far as the eye can see, and we have now enough time has gone by for them to have actually stripped the vehicle down to where they now can service all the parts and then start replacing it. And we have discovered a few things that were a little bit unexpected.
I'm Andrew St Pierre White. Join me as I share my passion for building four-wheel drive trucks and then travelling to the remotest parts of the world.
Alright, so here we have all of the bits that you've taken, or most of them anyway, that you've removed out of the vehicle. So I'm going to ask Paul to help us understand where to find signs of wear, and again to tell the story of the vehicle and how to decide whether things need replacing or can just go back and maybe if we don't have a limitless budget, go back and we know to keep an eye on them in the future.
At this point, we know that the gearbox has a major fault in reverse, so it's been sent off for a rebuild.
Gearbox.
Secondly, the transfer gearbox is being investigated. The presence of free-wheel front hubs suggests something isn't right there either.
So the prop is standing still.
The chassis is in good order.
It's really in good condition, and that's what I look for.
The cooling system is a bit of a mess, and the aircon has been disconnected. But with the basic investigations complete, Paul has decided that it's actually a better idea to remove the engine altogether. That was a bit of a surprise to me.
So Andrew, we've taken your car, your engine out the car. It made a big difference. Because we had to change the engine mounts and because we had the gearbox off and the radiator out, it just made much more sense to pull the whole engine out with a little bit of work. And it sits here in front of us and I can just go through some of the things that we found on the engine. Probably that I would look to check for. Basically going back to telling us the story of what we found, like the oil leak. So the big oil leak that we found running down what looked like it could have been from the back rear main oil seal on the back of the engine that sits here, or possibly from the gearbox, was actually just the tappet cover. Okay.
Which is good news.
It's very good news, but we're still going to change that seal because we've already got everything out, and it's such a short change when you do a gearbox and we take the flywheel off and we send it to an engineering firm and we machine the flywheel before we fit the new clutch. And that's something people don't always do. Take a worn flywheel which possibly even has heat spots on it. In the worst case scenario, sometimes they have cracks from heat and you can see a blue discoloration on the flywheel. So it's always worth taking the flywheel off, machine it down, they surface grind it, check the rear main oil seal and change it.
So if I may just go back a little bit, you decided to take the engine out because the gearbox was going to come out because of the problem we had discovered. Would you have normally taken the engine out in a vehicle like this? And at what point would you say, no, it's not worth taking the engine out, given the fact that we have to do the engine, the mounts, gearbox mounts as well? So
it's not necessary to take the engine out in many cases because it's a lot of extra work, a lot of extra cost. But in this scenario, we are changing the radiator and we're changing the air conditioning condenser. So from our inspection we saw that both of those are compromised and we're taking those out. The gearbox is out, and we're going to change the gearbox to the engine mountings, and you'll see from one of the mountings that you can see signs of wear. But a lot of that work can be done with the engine in place. It just can be left there. It's much easier to not create extra work and extra cost if you don't need to.
Okay, so you're saying that there is a point where you realized that actually taking the engine out was actually going to save money, because it's now going to be easier working on the engine with it out, which is going to save a little bit of money. But the point is that you had to make the call in the best interest of the project, money being one of those interests. It has to be.
Has to be, yeah.
That to take the motor out was actually the best course of action. Because to be honest with you, I walked in here this morning and I looked and thought, ooh, it looks bad.
It looks bad.
You've literally dismantled the car.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying actually we reached the point where
It's easy.
this was going to be a better option.
You know, when you're trying to do work on the engine and change stuff, and you're lying underneath the car trying to change a seal, and you're trying to do work on the front, this is going to be the best position where you know you can put stuff back on the engine easily. Now, you know, you can do it all in situ. You absolutely can. If we weren't changing your engine mounts and we weren't taking the radiator and the air conditioning condenser out, the engine would still be in your car. Okay. And you probably would have been happier this morning when you walked in, because I didn't tell you we were taking it out.
You didn't.
Anyway, so what we looked at here, of course, seals are a thing that wear a lot, okay? And when we're doing bits off the front, which is the timing belt, now this engine runs with a rubber timing belt, that's something which does get changed on regular service intervals. But when I'm redoing a truck for expedition, and I don't know the history of the truck, I don't take any risks with that. So I will fit a complete timing belt kit, and Terrain Tame have supplied us the complete kit with the idler bearing, with the actual seals we need for the camshaft. But now it's important, before you just put new seals on, to actually see how worn is the shaft and what wears shafts. So if I look at the shaft over here, this is your camshaft here, okay, there is slight wear here, and if I take my finger and I rub it along, you can see there's some shiny spots there where the seals is run, okay. Now it hasn't grooved it, it's got a slight wear. We'll take that and we'll comfortably clean that up with a bit of 1200 water paper, and it's like refacing it for the new seal to run, like where we did for the clutch. Clean that up nicely, put the seal back in, a little bit of lubricant grease on there, and it'll be perfect. It will not be a problem. However, if I'd come here and there was a big groove in there, a deep groove, where you can imagine grease and dust mixing up, creating grinding paste, and I see that that's worn, that's going to tell me if I put a new seal on, there's a chance it could leak again. And we don't want that. So part of going through whatever we stripped off, be it wheel bearings, be it stub axles, is to examine what we're putting back and how good is part we're putting the seal on or the gasket on. So making sure the surface here is all true. These tappet covers that come on here, it's a plastic tappet cover. If this engine gets really hot, they can sometimes warp. And you know, then you have an oil leak, which is you put a new gasket and it still leaks. So it's again telling us a story. So we're happy. We're going to put a new gasket. We're going to check the tappet cover to make sure that it's nice and true and flat. So when we put the new gasket on and tighten it down, it's going to seal it. New seal on the cam. Here you can see we've removed the water pump. Inside here, it's quite good actually. Normally you'd find if an engine it doesn't have a lot of antifreeze, and the misconception for a lot of people is antifreeze is there to lubricate the working parts inside the cooling system, like the water pump, the seals in the water pump. It also stops corrosion, and that's really, really important. And people don't actually put enough antifreeze or change it often enough. And depending on the coldness of the climate you're going into, will vary the ratio of how much antifreeze you're putting into the system, the cooling system. So I want to make sure that every time I look in my cooling system, I can see there's antifreeze. You can measure it. There's a lot of ways of checking the concentration of antifreeze.
So I check it looking at the color of it must not be clear. It must be either blue or orange.
The concentration is what varies. Okay, so I normally mix a 50-50 mix. I need pure glycol antifreeze from Toyota or a really good quality make, and I'll mix it with distilled water and I'll put it into the cooling system. Okay, and I'll make sure the overflow bottle also has some antifreeze in.
Distilled water?
I use distilled water. You know, tap water, look, you can if you have to, but remember that's all got properties in the water. Distilled is more pure. Okay, It's not wrong, it's just one of the things I like to do. Okay, so we've taken the water pump off, we're changing it. Your water pump wasn't leaking, and I'm going to show you the water pump just now. There is a telltale if the water pump leaks, but it's one of the things that if this water pump fails, you really can't drive far with a water pump that's leaking, because you're compromising the cooling system in a big way. So that's one of the parts we always carry spare. And it's not the old one we've just taken off, because that eventually dries out the seal that's been worn, bits of rust collect, and you put an old one back on and very soon it's leaking again. So I'll carry another new water pump, maybe not even the same quality if I need to save a bit of money, but as long as it's a spare, which is we can take with us. But the best one, the best quality one, is going on the motor. Here we've taken the crank off. So the big crank pulley that sits over here, that's come off. Your timing belt sits here, and you'll see it when it all goes back on with the new timing belt and the tension and all that. Here again, the next, I want to make sure that this actually feels good. This is brilliant. There's nothing wrong here. You can feel that there. It's lovely. It's nice and smooth.
Perfect.
So when we put a new seal on there,
Yes.
that's not going to give us any problems at all where it sits. For the rest, you know, we're changing the power steering. The power steering pump we've taken off, and that's going to be changed. We've looked at the rest of the motor. It's actually in really good condition, and we know from the records that you and I looked at that this motor has been opened, it has had work done on it. So I'm confident that when we put it back together with the new injectors, with new glow plugs, with all the auxiliaries we're putting back on, this car's going to last a long time and give you many miles of good driving.
Good. Well, that's good to know.
So we've taken the diffs out. Okay, the big thing is we've had to strip down the axles, we've taken the side shafts out. We want to actually check the condition of the diffs. With the diff in the axle, you can check for backlash. You can actually check that the amount of movement on the front flange here, to what degree it moves backwards and forwards compared to the movement inside here on the crown wheel and the pinion. So the biggest challenge you have is once you start getting a lot of play between the teeth here and the inside here, if you look in here, you've got your pinion and your crown wheel here, and where these teeth mesh, you get play. And to set up the diff properly with the bearings that are sitting carrying the actual crown wheel and pinion, it's important that all this is set up in tolerance. And as wear happens, and as people drive, and over the years of wear and tear, the bearings wear, the teeth can wear, and the distances between the teeth can also start increasing, and that's when you get play on the diffs and backlash on the diff. So by taking the diffs out, we're giving ourselves the confidence as we can actually visually look at these teeth. We can look at the wear patterns on the teeth, we can look at the coloration. We're looking for problems. Is there a tooth that's chipped or broken? There's no distinctive wear patterns, and you'll see wear patterns on the crown wheel when it starts getting a lot shinier, and you can see it's almost, the teeth are quite worn and sometimes even rounded edges. So in this particular instance, I'm not even going to strip these diffs. The bearings feel good. We could strip them down, we could put new bearings in, but the condition is telling me, actually I'm prepared to take the chance on these because they are in such good condition, looking at the actual teeth and everything, that's worth taking a chance on. If we found that there was a lot of play here, the seal was leaking, we could say, okay, look, let's change all this, let's strip them down, let's do the seals, let's do everything. So here's where you've got to make a call, because there has been wear, okay, on these diffs, but because we haven't got any potential problems on them, let them be. The worst case scenario is that at some stage you might find a seal starts leaking here, okay? It's not a difficult job to change that. You don't have to take the whole diff out, you can change the seal. But for the sake of what we're trying to balance the project out and what we spend and what we do, we're not trying to rebuild the car in its entirety. We're trying to basically take this vehicle and put it back to a very good condition on the road, which is going to be safe, reliable, and give really good miles on overland expedition travel. The drive shafts are a different story. We've taken those out. We're replacing the front drive shafts, and those do take a lot more wear. So these come out, we clean them up, we check everything, put a new gasket on, clean the inside of the diff housings properly so that we can take any sludge or any metal particles that are lying in the diff that you don't always get to. So it's important to wash the diff casings out properly before we put these back in, So when we put the new oil in, it's now in a nice clean environment, and it actually works and actually prolongs the life. You know, oils are the lifeblood. It's like the blood in our veins. It's the lifeblood of us. It's the lifeblood of the car. So of course, oils are not expensive. Good quality oils are essential, and change them often.
So looking closely at these hubs and bearings is just taking me back to my Range Rover. The last time I did this kind of work was with a vehicle that was also close to 20 years old. It didn't have close to this mileage on it, and I ran bearings and replaced hubs and hub seals and all this kind of thing. So there's a certain, there's a bit of, I'm starting to remember things that I haven't had to deal with in a very long time.
The used parts table will slowly fill as our new parts table empties. I'm looking forward to how this will look in a few days' time.
Terrain tamer to have a
So
bit
they
of-
have supplied us with a belt kit.
Yeah, it's really nice the way they do it, because the bags are really useful. For one, I really like these. They go into my spares kit. And what happens with belts, and is you find that belts get hard, and they do sometimes crack. If you had to look in there, you'd often see that you get cracks appearing, and then the belt is actually really quite tired. What I found with belts is that in the ambient temperature, where it's really hot in our climates in Africa, it's dusty, it's really hot, under bonnet temperatures are hotter, belts actually shorten their lifespan. And people will look at a belt and they'll say, well, they look alright, they're not pretty much frayed up. So now what happens is the people, when the belt slips, and you hear it when you start the car, the tendency is just to adjust the alternator or the air contentioner. And all that does is just put more wear on the bearings. The belt's not gripping because it's hard and it's tired and it's old. It's much better to take a new set of belts, and actually they're softer, you can feel they're a little bit more grippy. Put the belt on, and the best way to test the belt between the two pulleys is to just, once you've tensioned it up, try and twist it 90 degrees. You shouldn't get it really much past 90 degrees. Over-tensioning a belt does more harm than under-tensioning it. So you don't want a belt to slip, but you don't want it too tight, because that actually puts a lot of premature wear on bearings in the alternator and the air conditioning. So I always change belts. I always carry a spare set of belts. The old ones are fine. They're not completely finished.
Good for
If
spares.
you want, carry them as spares.
Good for
Save the
spares,
money.
yes.
You know? So there we go.
I actually ran a number of belts on my 105, and I always had spares, so we're going to hold on to a nice set of spares for.
And as I think you mentioned to me, you had a problem because the pitch of the belt wasn't correct. It's important to check.
It was a pirate part. Even though it was labeled Toyota, it turned out to be a pirate part, and the profile, and these come in a matched pair, right?
They do, yeah.
Okay, so there was a matched pair, wrong profile, and they just started breaking over a very, very short time. So I learned something about that too. But while they're busy doing that, it's slightly overwhelming. I'm just so glad these guys are just taking it and just, they obviously know exactly what they're doing, which is just as well, because I'm kind of a lot more is being done to the vehicle than I thought would need to be done. Is this typical? Probably. But what I will do is, during the process of making these videos, we're going to come up with costings. So in other words, realistically, not every part here is needed for this vehicle. They're not all you must replace all of these parts. That's not the case at all. Several of these parts we don't really need to replace, but the terrain tamer have given us the parts, we're obviously going to replace them. But at the end of it, I want to be able to present if this was a typical vehicle, what components must be replaced, what components, yeah, we could get away with it, or others, no, don't need to replace them at all. To give you an idea, realistically speaking, what can be expected when buying a vehicle with fairly high mileage and converting it into a really reliable truck with another 150,000, 200,000, 300,000 kilometers back into it.